Hi everyone, I'm Emilio. I'm a junior here, and last fall I went abroad to the Bahamas, and we had to do all sorts of research there. And as part of the curriculum, I had to research spillover effects in Caribbean spiny lobster. And here are the findings we had. Now, to be specific, we were stationed here at Cow Point, Eleuthera, right at this point. Oh, oops. Yeah, here. Right here, we take boats every Thursday for about 5 to 6 hours, and we go out into this area here, the sand beds, and we look for lobster, which would be in these condos, which are these large boxes made of steel and wood. They're around 5 feet by 10 feet, and what's really interesting is that they don't have any bait in them, and they're not really traps. Lobster are free to come and go as they please. But since there isn't any shelter in the really vast seagrass beds, they're kind of forced to hide there, to hide from predators. So what we'd have to do, we'd flip them over between 3 or 4 of us, and we'd have to work as fast as we could to catch as many lobster, because they'd immediately try and run away. What we really wanted to study here was spillover effect, which happens when we have a marine protected area and animals from inside the marine protected areas move outside to create a healthier population. The marine protected area in question is over here highlighted in yellow. It's here in the bay where most of the fishing boats leave, and then it stretches much further out, almost to the tip of the island, and covers pretty much all of the seagrass beds. Most of the time, we'd be more focused on collecting data up here because the marine protected area isn't properly regulated at times, and the area in here in the bay was often overfished, so we would rarely be able to find anything. We use all sorts of tools, like gloves, lobster hooks, and nets. What probably be easiest was to swim down, because we'd have to free dive, because if we wore scuba tanks, it'd be too heavy and the lobster would swim away because they're too fast. We'd have to snorkel down and use really thick fishing gloves to grab them. These lobster are a little different from the American lobster we're used to, because they don't have claws. They're just really sharp. So you have to be careful not to grab them from the wrong places, or else you'd get a cut. If there was a lot of lobster, we could also use a net. It was much harder though, because they tend to swim in really erratic and unpredictable patterns. And underwater, it's really slow moving the net around. Some fishermen we worked with chose to use a lobster hook, because they've been trained with it for a long time. So they'd have to distract the lobster with their hands and then put the hook under them to grab the tail. Overall, what I found to be easiest was just to use gloves, because it gave you the most control over what you were doing. Since you were underwater the whole time and the current was pretty strong, sometimes it was kind of hard to move around with a lobster net or a lobster hook, and the gloves helped you move around easier and corner the lobster. Now, the goals we had were not only to measure spillover effect, but also to get a more accurate representation of how quickly these lobster were growing and where we were finding them. So what we do, we swim down the condos, you can see here. You'd have to flip them over and catch as many lobster as you could. Then you bring them back up. We'd have around 5 people on the boat and 5 people in the water. People on the boat would use a special tag called the T-bar tag, which we put in the lobster. You'd have to bend the lobster a bit and then put it into its back. Now, the big problem we had was that lobster don't grow in a normal way. They shed their skin like a snake does. So whenever they shed their skin, the original tag we were using would just fall off, and we wouldn't be able to know which lobster we caught already. So we had to develop a new kind of tag, which would stay in the lobster for around 5 molting cycles before it fell out, which made it a lot easier to track their growth. You can see here the T-bar tag. It's a small tag gun. You have to be really careful not to hurt the lobster, but it'd help us really easily know which lobster we caught already, and we'd keep them all in a database so we could measure how much they've grown in how many days. Yeah, we catch a lot of lobster. The most we caught in one day was around 120. The most I caught in one day was around 20. And we have to put them all in this cooler up in the boat to make sure they stay hydrated and wouldn't die, because the lobster fishery in the Bahamas is incredibly important. It makes up around 80% of all their fishing income for the year, and it's worth around $90 million. As you can see here, most of the time we didn't have tanks or anything, we just have to snorkel on down. The water could get as deep as 30 feet, so it was definitely a challenge at first, but as we went more and more into the season, it started getting easier. And here's a picture of a Caribbean lobster. It's a little different. It has really, really sharp antennas, but it doesn't have any claws. They're also smaller and faster than the American calico. And here's a video just to get a better idea of how it was being underwater. As you might be able to tell, it can be a bit disorienting with the current and all the sand getting kicked up. But what you saw here was honestly one of our easier catches. The fisherman we've been working with had been a lobster fisherman for his entire life, and he'd been in charge of the lobster fishery program for about 35 years. Here's more of what it would look like from a student perspective. You can see there the condo and how we move it and all the lobster we have under there. You could have up to 50 lobster under one condo, which made it really hard to keep track of them all because they camouflage really well. There's definitely a lot of people in the water. It can be hard to keep track of everything. And especially with all the sharp hooks we had, you have to be really careful. Now for our findings. On the size of the lobster, from the around 300 lobster we caught, we managed to estimate that they're growing around 0.21 centimeters a day. This is a more rough estimate though because the molting cycle for the lobster changes as they grow. When they're really young, they change their shells really quickly. But when they're getting older, they might change their shell maybe once a year or less. We also noticed that the carapace length of the lobster, which is the length of the distance from the eyes to the tail, which is a pretty good indicator of how big they are, tended to decrease as they started getting bigger. We kept finding less and less large lobsters as the season went on. And we find a lot less lobster skins from large lobsters as well, which led us to wonder where they were all going. As for the marine protected area, the marine protected area was still being proposed and it was still being debated at the time of the study. So we couldn't really determine how effective the spillover effect had been. It wasn't being properly enforced, and lots of times we'd just run into fishermen out there fishing the same condos as we were. So it was pretty much the same, and the spillover effect wasn't great because it wasn't being properly enforced, but this serves as a really good preliminary data study so that when they continue doing spillover effect research in the future, they have a good baseline to base it off of. Again, hypothesis we had for future studies was that as lobster grew bigger, we started seeing less and less of them, regardless of where they were. After the specific cutoff length of 90 centimeters of carapace length, they just disappear entirely. Out of about 20 dives we did, we only managed to find 1 or 2 lobster with about 90-inch carapace lengths. And in all the years that they've been doing this research, they'd only been able to manage to find around 10. A hypothesis we had is that since lobster are migratory creatures, they might be moving to deeper waters as they grow. And that's something we'd like to experience in the future. We'd have to develop more refined technique and get better with the scuba tanks. But we'd also have to establish sonar tags, which would help us find the lobster we recaptured before we ran out of air. It's definitely something we'd like to look into in the future, and it's something they're working on really hard right now. Now you might be wondering, why is any of this important? Well, the Bahamas is almost entirely reliant on the lobster industry. Plenty of people on the island, vast majority even, are lobster fishing. If this lobster fishery gets overfished and all of their stock is deplenished, people's families are going to go hungry. This is a multi-million-dollar problem, a multi-million-dollar industry. Corporations such as Costco are constantly working to fix this problem as well, and it impacts everyone all over the world who eats lobster.
It's very important that we guard our heritage. It's very important that the marine resources are protected in this country.
You have to preserve it for generations to come.
For my children and my grandchildren, and not just for me, but the people of the Bahamas.
It's nature's gift here to the Bahamas, and it's a way for them to bring a piece of that to you. And we're all out here trying to make sure that that can happen many years into the future.
This is a problem that everyone in Bahamas is working really hard to solve. Especially all the fishermen we've worked with. They were all very cooperative, and we even established a program for fishermen to help register the lobster they caught, which helped up to double the amount of data we were getting. So now I want to thank the Cape Eleuthera Institute for doing this research and giving us all the resources we needed, and St. Mary's and Acadia University for funding everything. Also, all the fishermen who contributed to our project, and everyone who helped establish the database, and also all the teammates I worked with, Rowan Pope, Isabel Junior, Marco, G Pace, everyone contributed a lot, and they all put in a really big effort here. And hopefully this will serve as an important baseline for studies in the future, and we'll be able to learn more about this intriguing fishery and how to keep it safe. Now, next week we'll have Victoria Shea with a presentation titled Segment Anything, next Thursday at 8 a.m. Thank you. Oh yeah, question? Any questions?
Were there any hypotheses about where the larger lobsters end up?
Yeah, we suspect they're going to patch reefs further down, but these could be as deep as 70 feet underwater. So it'll be really hard to get there without a scuba tank, which is why we haven't been able to do it yet. Anyone else? Eric?
What is the spillover effect?
This spillover effect is when lobster, in this case, from the marine protected area, which grow much larger and much healthier because no one's fishing them, start to move outside of the marine protected area and lay eggs with lobster outside of it. And in general, it'll just establish a healthier, larger lobster population, which will help fishermen even more. Yeah?
Are there laws preventing like certain people from getting too many lobsters when they fish?
In part. The regulations they have in place is that the tail needs to be 5 centimeters wide, but this is rarely being enforced. No one's really out on the water enforcing any regulations, which is why the marine protected area keeps getting fished. So even though there's laws and people are establishing all these precedents, it's not being enforced, so nothing really happens. Anyone else? Yep.
Are the lobster, so where these lobster condos were, is this where the lobster fishermen are actually doing the fishing? So were you like competing with the fishermen while you were trying to research these lobsters, or were the condos in the protected area? They weren't in the protected area, were they?
They were.
Oh, they were.
But
So then,
condos aren't really property. The Bahamas determined that and no one can own any part of the ocean. So as soon as you drop a condo, anyone's free to fish it. The fishermen are often really secretive about where they put their condos because they don't want anyone to steal their fish. But lots of times we find our own condos have been fished. And I think maybe once or twice we did research at a condo we found from a fisherman.
so you weren't really measuring how many lobsters leave the area then? It was-
Well, we had inside and outside.
Oh, okay. You had
And we'd find the lobsters that we'd already tagged and find the location we tagged them at. So that way we could keep track of where they were going. If we found a lobster for the first time inside the protected area, we'd tag it and then release it again.
and see if
And
you
then
found it
see
outside.
where else we could find it. Or if we found it in the same spot, we could also measure how much it grew.